Hello all and welcome back to our kitchen. Today we thought it would be fun to take you along with the Easter side dishes that we made. We ended up going to 2 family functions and we had a very busy weekend, and so we decided to start cooking ahead of time. We started on Wednesday night and we made quite a few things, and so we are going to take you along as we make all the things. This is a slightly different video in that I have a lot of voiceover because we had people over and chatting children and barking dogs, and so the majority of me narrating what I'm doing will be voiceover this time. But we started with some sourdough bread. While we washed up some eggs, we are going to use a lot of eggs. We are going to use a lot of potatoes. We had a lot of potatoes to use up, and our chickens were laying in overtime. So what a better way to use up ingredients that you need to use up before they go bad than by sharing with family and friends. And so we're going to get some water going while we finish a few other things. We're going to keep that sourdoughs going in the oven. And we are just gonna start getting all the things done. So the water that we are starting to boil here in our big stainless steel kettle is going to be for our potato salad potatoes. So we're gonna give that a good deal of salt, and then we're gonna start our small pot on the boil for our hard-boiled eggs. We're gonna make hard-boiled eggs for not only our deviled eggs, but also we always put eggs in our potato salad. I always remember, even when I was little, my mom crumbling up the egg yolks and it just giving the potato salad that really pretty bright yellow color. And so we're gonna allow this to boil. We're gonna pull our sourdough loaf out of our oven, and we're gonna keep putting away our eggs and finishing washing our eggs and just keep rolling here. I'm not exactly sure how many pounds of potatoes I started with. This is, as I have said before, I am not really a recipe person, so I just kind of use what I have. But we're gonna get our potatoes in our water. We're gonna put our our eggs in the water to make hard-boiled eggs. Now, how do you guys put your eggs in? I've heard of some people putting them in while the water's cold. My dad always put them in while the water was boiling, and so I'm using a spoon to lower them in so that I hopefully don't burn myself. But how do you guys hard-boil your eggs? A friend of mine recently told me that she uses her air fryer to hard-boil eggs, and that even the farm fresh eggs peel nicely. So in the comments, if you've made it this far, let us know your favorite way of hard-boiling eggs. And while we've got those going, we are gonna start 2 more loaves of sourdough bread. We are gonna start with about 200 grams of our starter. We're gonna mix in 650 grams of water. I like to use a warm water, not a hot water, but so that it feels a little warm to the touch. I just feel like it helps activate the yeast. 22 grams of salt, and then you will see me take this off my scale and give it a good mix. And what I'm looking for is to really break up that starter, and I want the water to take on kind of a milky color. I'll tip you in so you can get a good look at what I'm talking about in just a second. And so I just like to really incorporate that starter into that warm water and get that yeast activated. I know not everybody puts their salt in at this stage. I just do because my water's warm. It gives the salt a chance to dissolve. And I have made a couple too many loaves where I have forgotten to add salt. And sourdough does not taste good without any salt. And next we are gonna add 950 grams of flour, and we are gonna mix this all up real good so that it is a really nice shaggy dough. And then we're gonna allow this to sit for an hour before we start our stretch and folds. And so when I hard boil eggs, I leave them in the water for about 12 minutes, and then I will strain out that hot water into my sink, and I will fill it with cold water, and then I will strain that again after a couple minutes and add more cold water, and I will dump in ice, and I will leave it sit for however long until I remember that they're there. And so then while those are cooling to help with the peeling process, we are going to cut up some celery and some onions for both our potato salad and our deviled eggs. I know a lot of recipes don't call for onions and celery in deviled eggs, but that is just something I always remember my mom putting in hers, and so we are going to put it in ours too. And so for the deviled eggs, I just make sure I chop it really fine so that way you don't get a big bite of an onion or a piece of celery. And so we put that in our little bowl, and in the bowl that I have the celery and the onions, as we cut up our eggs. So for deviled eggs, you just half your eggs and pop out that yolk, and I'm gonna plop those right into the bowl that we are gonna mix our filling in. And now we just had to share this one because it's always exciting when you get a double yolker from an overachieving hen. So we are gonna arrange all of our eggs onto our serving platter. Might as well put them on there right away instead of dirtying one dish and transferring them to something else, right? Sometimes I'm all about convenience. And so we are gonna arrange these eggs onto our serving platter, and then we are going to start with our filling. And when we started with our egg filling, I started with, I believe this is a third or a half a cup of mayonnaise, and we went from there. I did end up adding more. As you mix it up, you'll be able to tell if it feels a little too dry, and less is always better to start with because you can always add more, but you can't take it out. And then we added a teaspoon and a half of ground mustard, and again, our onions and our celery are in there, and our egg yolks. You saw me add a pinch of salt, a dash of freshly ground black pepper, and we're gonna give it we're gonna break up those egg yolks and give it a good stir. And it was about here that I decided this was looking a little too dry. And you'll see in a few minutes here, or a few seconds here, that it ends up looking much smoother, and that is because I added more mayonnaise to this. As you can see, it looks much smoother here now, and again, because we added more mayonnaise and kept mixing until it felt like a better consistency. After we fill our eggs with the filling, we are going to sprinkle them with some paprika. We bought this spice in bulk for when we make sausage, and as you can see, I am not the best sprinkler when they do not have the shaker top on them. So hopefully you guys can sprinkle paprika better than I can. But now we have finished our deviled eggs. We have some bacon going on the stove. This is just some bacon tips that we had left over and needed to be used up. And we are gonna put these into our potato salad. We are gonna stretch and fold our sourdough and let that rest again. And when we are all done with our sourdough, we are gonna clean up just a little bit, pick up these eggs off of the counter, and just make more space for us to start this potato salad. After the potatoes have been boiled with the skins on and you start to peel them, you'll be able to just peel that skin off if you just catch the edge of them with your knife. And then we are going to cut these up into just about bite-sized pieces. And as we finish cutting up our potatoes, we are going to take a brief intermission from the potato salad again to stretch and fold our sourdough. The thing I really like about sourdough is it's hands-off enough that I can fit it into a busy schedule. So a busy night like tonight where I am trying to get a whole bunch of other dishes done, I can just leave it on the counter. It doesn't require 10 minutes of consistent kneading. It just takes 20 seconds here and there to do some stretch and folds. And these are generally 20 to 30 minutes apart, but on a night like tonight, it kind of just happens when it happens. And as you'll see, our bread turns out just fine. So we are gonna cut up some more eggs for our potato salad. You can see me plopping those yolks out of these eggs into my bowl that I will mix the dressing into. And I am just gonna cut these eggs up and toss those on top of our potatoes. As you can see, I picked a bowl that was far too small again. We are gonna take these bacon tips out of our fry pan, and we are going to cut these up a little smaller, and we are going to put those into our potato salad as well. This bacon was actually a smoked pepper bacon, and this is some of the bacon that we packaged up with you guys a few months ago when we had made our bacon. This bacon for me is something that is a little too spicy to eat on its own, but my husband really enjoys it, and in something like a potato salad or a recipe, it tastes just fine. You can't tell the spiciness. It probably adds just enough extra spice to the dish that it made it even better. And now you can see me crumbling up all those egg yolks and dumping in our onions and our celery. We are going to add about 3 teaspoons of mustard. And as you can see, I do not measure the mayonnaise. We just dump that in, and we are going to mix that up. And again, I will add more mayonnaise to this as needed, because those potatoes, especially as they're still warm, really kind of seem to absorb the mayonnaise, the sauce. And so I found that even the next day, I had to add a little bit more mayonnaise. And as this sits overnight, or as you prepare it, it's better chilled, but you can do a taste test and you can even add more salt or spices if necessary. It's pretty customizable to your likes. A potato salad that we used to get as kids always had shredded cheese in it along with the bacon, which is why I decided to add shredded cheese to this recipe as well as the bacon. So we're going to shred some cheddar cheese and get that all mixed up really well to complete our potato salad. So we didn't quite finish everything we had on the agenda yesterday, so we are going to get to working on finishing everything today, including baking some of those sourdough loaves we started yesterday. we're going to try to put our scalloped potatoes in this little container. We don't need a lot, nor do I want to take a lot. So we're going to aim for that, but I want to make sure I save some of these for some mashed potatoes as well. Otherwise, we'll have to pick up some more potatoes tonight, and then we'll do some more tomorrow. When I'm doing lots of cooking like this, where I'm trying to get a lot of stuff done ahead of time, I like to try to start with my dishwasher and my sink empty. I forgot to start the dishwasher last night, so it's working for us now while we continue to do more work. I have a love-hate relationship. How do you peel your potatoes? I have a love-hate relationship with this thing. I feel like I waste less of the potato with this, but also feel like I spend more time shaking the peels out of it than would otherwise. Now we are going to get ready to start our sourdough. We are going to plop these out of their baskets onto some parchment paper. These were kept in the refrigerator overnight to help develop some flavor. And we are going to score these. We will do shallow scores for our decorative scores, and we will do one deep score for our expansion score. That expansion score will allow the bread to grow, expand, and rise. It allows us to control where the bread expands. And these will get placed into our preheated Dutch ovens. Our Dutch ovens have been preheating with our oven at 450 degrees. And these will bake in our 450 degree oven for 20 minutes. And then we will take the lid off and drop the temperature down to 425 degrees, and they will bake for another 20 minutes. And with our last loaf of sourdough going into the oven, we are going to start peeling some onions for our scalloped potatoes, and we're going to get this recipe rolling while our bread bakes. And as we get these chopped up, I am going to drop these right into a cast iron with a little bit of butter in them and get them sauteing. I think when things are sauteed, they just add a little bit more flavor. And so when we make things like scalloped potatoes, I just have a tendency to saute my onions first. And we are going to start thinly slicing our potatoes for our scalloped potatoes. I could see where having a mandolin slicer would be greatly beneficial, but for the amount of times during a year that we make something like scalloped potatoes, I have not made the investment. I could have tried digging out the food processor and using that slicing option, but I did not opt to do that. And so we just manually cut them up. And now we are going to start our sauce. We're going to start with quite a bit of milk, and I'm going to dump that right into our skillet with the onions and butter. And we are going to start letting this cook down. And while that milk heats up, we are going to add some cheese. I just decided to use up some of the cheese that I had in the refrigerator. And And so I added some Swiss cheese to this, and then I'm gonna grate some cheddar cheese, and we are gonna get that stirred in and incorporated, and then we are gonna return back to slicing our potatoes while our sauce continues to thicken, cook down, and everything's gonna get nice and melted and incorporated. And now we are ready to start adding our potatoes into our baking dish. So we will add a nice layer of potatoes into our dish, and then we will cover those potatoes with some of our sauce. And then you will see me add some grated cheese on top of that sauce. My mom never added grated cheese in between her potato layers, but because I wanted to use up the Swiss cheese I had, I opted to go ahead and just grate some in between. And you see I have added a second baking dish, and that is because I had far more potatoes than I thought I did. And you can see my mom is standing next to me, and she's like, "You need a bigger baking dish." And so I said, well, we're going to 2 functions, let's just make 2 dishes, it'll be fine. And so that's what we did. We ended up baking 2 dishes of scalloped potatoes, and it turned out just right. I didn't want to take a whole bunch to either function. Again, these are just side dishes, they're not the main dish, and so having 2 smaller plates of scalloped potatoes was just right. And so, as I had said before, I grate just a little bit of cheese and I put that in between our potato layers. Once this cheese is grated in, we will add another layer of potatoes, and we will repeat. We will add more sauce, and then we will top that with more cheese, because I want to be able to put this in the oven and have that cheese get just a little bit toasted and crunchy and delicious on the top. And just as we were about to add our final layer of potatoes into that scalloped potato dish, our timer went off for our sourdough bread. And as you can see, I was running out of counter space, and I try to shuffle everything onto the top of the stove so I don't melt anything or discolor my countertop. And we are going to pull this bread out of these Dutch ovens so that they can cool on this wire rack. This one is a cranberry white chocolate chunk with some zested orange, and just a regular loaf as well. I thought that the cranberries added just a fun pop of color to this loaf that was perfect for the Easter table. And we are going to finish up this little container of scalloped potatoes. Looking back, I would have pre-baked these a little bit before I covered them and put them in the refrigerator, because they took significantly longer for the potatoes to soften than I had anticipated, and it added for significantly longer cook time for Easter lunch. And so again, I would cover them, and I would have pre-baked these for probably an hour before I put them in the refrigerator to take along with us to Easter lunch. Hindsight is always 20/20, but something to try next time. Okay, it is a new day. It is Friday morning, and we are going to get started on a cheesecake. We opted to take a cheesecake. It has been too many years since I have made a cheesecake, and it was requested. So here we are going to cut up a little bit of parchment paper so that we can put that on the bottom of our springform pan. I have found the hard way that just makes it significantly easier to take out of your springform pan without totally ruining your graham cracker crust on the bottom. Live and learn, right? Live and learn. So we are gonna get some graham crackers crushed up and put into our food processor. I have found that the food processor is just significantly faster and easier turning the graham crackers into crumbs for our crust. This recipe that I use calls for a whole box of graham cracker crumbs. I always end up with just a little bit more than I need, which is fine because that always allows me to make just a small little personal cheesecake for my husband, which he greatly enjoys. So we are gonna get these graham crackers all turned into crumbs for our bottom, and from there we will melt some butter. I always find that I have to add more butter than necessary, but I will cover that with you guys in just a little bit. So this recipe usually calls for 3 to 4 tablespoons of butter for the graham cracker crust. From experience in making it before, and it's been a couple years since I've made it, I believe I've always ended up using more butter, but we'll see how this feels because we want to be able to pack it without it kind of falling down. So let's get this good and mixed up, and then we'll see. We'll play it by feel. I think we're gonna go ahead and add just a little more. While that melts, I'm gonna go ahead and get my food processor washed up and drying. You guys can pick it up on the camera, but that cow was out there belly aching about something. And we're going to cream this with 1.5 cups of sugar. I am notorious for picking bowls that are too small for what I'm trying to do. This sugar is not a regular white sugar. This is a raw cane sugar, and so it tends to be a little bit, the granules tend to be a little bit thicker, a little bit larger, I guess I should say, than regular white beet sugar that you get at the store. And so nothing tends to come out completely smooth when I use this, but that's alright. Now we're going to slowly blend in 3/4 cup of milk. one at a time. Alright, now that we put the apron on so we don't get our clothes a mess, let's get back to finishing this cheesecake. We're going to need that oven at 350 degrees. And if we're going to preheat the oven, you guys know what that means, don't you? Do you need a new piece of paper? Yeah? Alright. We'll get you a new piece of paper. Hold on. Whoops. Do you not want that spoon? Are you all done with that spoon? Baby girl. Mama should have used a bigger bowl. Little vanilla beans in there. Yep. And a quarter cup of flour. Anybody else get to cooking and then end up feeling like their counters just kind of like combust? Because I do. Alright, let's just make sure this is good and stirred. Make sure there's no hunks of cream sitting on the bottom. We're going to pour this in here, and anything that's left over is going to go in a little pan.
Remember me talking about that little mini personal cheesecake that I make my husband when I make cheesecakes? Well, here it is. It's just in a regular old Pyrex dish, and I bake it just the same, and it turns out just wonderful.
Let's stretch and fold that bread dough. Get this in the oven. Alright guys, now we're going to put these into our 350 degree oven for an hour.
And so while that cheesecake is in the oven and our sourdough is resting, we are just going to get these counters wiped off and get everything a little bit more tidy so that we can continue on with our day.
So this roll recipe, I have made this before. I don't know where this recipe came from. This is also written down from my grandma's handwritten recipe. So I don't know where she got it from, but I took a picture of her recipe and wrote it down in this book quite a few years ago before we bought this house. And I have a love-hate relationship with this recipe. It calls for boiling water, it calls for cold water, it calls for butter-flavored shortening. So we're gonna do a couple things different than what the recipe calls for. If it turns out, I will make note of the changes that I made, and I will share that with you guys in the description below. But I think we're gonna try it, and we're gonna see how it goes. And it'll either turn out or it won't. So let's it calls for proofing our yeast, so we're gonna dissolve some sugar and warm water with our yeast. So I need my yeast. All right, we need 1 teaspoon of sugar. Half a cup of warm water.
you don't want your water to be too hot because we don't want it to kill our yeast. We want it to activate our yeast. Alright, I always just use a fork and stuff it makes a terrible noise, I'm sorry. Now we are going to do 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. Alright, now we are going to get this blended up, and I am going to set this aside for about 5 to 10 minutes and just make sure that it gets bubbly, just in case our yeast is not doing so hot. And now you guys can see just how frothy this yeast got. And so now I know that it is active and it's still good. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna use this to start our rolls. So this recipe calls for a cup of butter flavored shortening. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna use 1/2 cup of lard and 1/2 cup of softened butter, I think. All right, this is a 1/2 cup of softened butter. And it says to blend this with 3/4 cup of sugar. Four minutes left on our cheesecake recipe. Now when our timer goes off for this cheesecake recipe, we are going to turn it off, and I'm going to crack this oven door, and for as long as possible we are going to leave that to just come to a temperature much slower, and that generally helps reduce the amount of cracking I see on the top of the cheesecake. There's no water bath or anything in here. There's no steam or anything. It's just in there baking, like a regular cake would be. All right, so this says to stir in boiling water, and then to stir in cold water, and then to stir in our yeast mixture. So I think I'm just going to put in warm, mostly room temperature water and just see how that suits us instead of trying to boil water and add ice cold water. Stir the yeast into this mixture, but because I want to use my KitchenAid, we're gonna reverse that. I'm just going to dump all that in here and put it on our KitchenAid with our dough hook and let it go for a little bit. Okay, so this calls for 4 beaten eggs. I'm going to grab my scraper. Need my bowl scraper. appear that I have totally misplaced my, oh, here it is, just kidding. Now we need 8 cups of flour. All right, let's start there, that's 2. And I'm just gonna scrape down the sides so that we know that the flour underneath isn't gonna not get mixed in. Still pretty sticky yet, but it's alright. Plenty of flour left on the sides here. So I just had that kneading on low while I caught up on our dishes. Now we are going to take this out of here and we are going to set this aside and let this rise until about double, and then we will see you back when this is ready to go. And while we let that rise, it is time to start the last of our Easter side dishes, which will be mashed potatoes. Just gonna take this back out, and we're gonna start peeling and start boiling some mashed potatoes. While I let the battery charge a little bit, I just went ahead and peeled some potatoes, and now we are just gonna get these in here and get softened, and we're gonna turn these into our mashed potatoes. So I'm just going to keep back about 2 cups of our potato water in case we decide to make those potato rolls. Dry out just a little bit.
And to our potatoes, we are going to add a dash of cream, and then we are going to get these, as my dad would say, whipped. And we are going to go ahead and get a heaping helping of butter into our potatoes, a little pinch of salt, and then we're going to add a good dash of pepper. This is just freshly ground black pepper, some onion powder, and a sprinkle, I know I added just a sprinkle of garlic powder in there as well, because hindsight being 20/20 again, I wished I would have added a little bit more. We're gonna get these blended back up. I decided they looked a little too dry, so we're gonna add just another dash of cream. And we're gonna get these to a consistency we're happy with and transfer them into a bowl that we are happy with. I had a friend a long time ago tell me that she added potato water to hers instead of so much milk or cream. And I just remember her potatoes being the best mashed potatoes I had ever had, and so I guess that's why I occasionally add potato water. And we are going to tap our mashed potatoes with some cheese. These bowls that we are adding these mashed potatoes to are the ones that you guys all seem to really love, and I love them too. And part of the reason I love them is they are oven safe, and so when we get to our events, we can just pop them in the oven and get these heated back up.
Okay, so to let rise, it's still pretty sticky, so it's been so long since I have made these, I do not remember how sticky they were or weren't. So, let's see what we got here. Almost feels like it needed more flour. This one might be a flop. Let's see. Probably would help if I would flour my counter. I'm used to my sourdough and I don't have to flour my counter. Before I floured my surface, I was beginning to seriously doubt that these were gonna work or turn out. And the little extra flour on the counter made a big difference, and I wish I would have thought of flouring my counter before I had dumped these out of the bowl. And you'll see these will really kind of start to come together in just a little bit and become much more workable once we added just a little bit more flour to our hands and to our surface. The key is floured hands and a floured work surface, I guess. I'm gonna get a baking tray ready with some parchment paper, I think. I was never good at this part. You guys can laugh. A little bit, just a little. Should I make the triangles bigger? I don't know. I'm not good at this. I don't remember how big Grandma used to make her crescents. I don't know. Well, I'm clearly not as good at rolling them as Grandma, but by the time we made it over here, I was doing quite a bit better. And we did end up opting to try to make the potato rolls. I was going to try to make what I remembered as being my grandma's really soft potato water rolls, but as it had gotten so late so fast, as sometimes things go, I opted just to find a recipe online, and I will put the link below because these turned out delicious. They were liked so much at the first gathering that I had to make a second batch the next night. And so we're gonna mix some, we actually end up using some of the mashed potatoes in this recipe, and I could not believe how easy and how fast this recipe came together. So I will definitely make sure to link these rolls. These were called Amish potato rolls. And again, I would just highly recommend that you give them a try. They came together really quick, they were really easy to make, and they were delicious. They were so delicious that some of the people there actually requested taking everything that was left home with them, which we took as a good compliment, and we let them take them home, and we just made some more the next night at home so that we had more to take to the next gathering. And we did make a double batch the next time, so that way we had more than enough to share and to send home with our loved ones. Our crescent rolls have finally risen enough that we are gonna put them in the oven. Hindsight being 2020, yet again, I would not have put both pans in the oven at the same time. You'll see why in a little bit. We're gonna take some time to give our senior dog, this old gal is almost 13, and so she needs extra loving every time we have time to spare.
And so we're gonna wash our hands and get back to baking all the things, finishing up. We've got dishes to clean up, and we are gonna grease our dish that we're gonna put those potato rolls in. You can see how nice and puffy those got. I sometimes, when I'm baking, keep my old butter wrappers, and so that I can grease my pans like this and feel like I'm not wasting anything. But we are gonna get these potato rolls separated out. Look at how nice and fluffy this dough is. It was such fun to work with. They said to make them into 10 to 12 rolls. I turned them into 8, and that seemed to be just about the perfect size for them being like little slider sized. And so we are gonna roll these into 8 little rolls and put those in our pan, and we are gonna let these rise now. And then I tried to put both trays of rolls in at the same time to save myself some time. I know that this oven has a tendency to run hot, and it was both on the inside. So where these two pans butt up against each other like this is where they got too hot. So my fault. I also should have considered the fact that this oven gets too hot. They just weren't looking done on the top, and so I left them in longer, 4 minutes longer than the rest of them called for. And now we have slightly post-toasty buns. But the rest of them looks okay, so I don't know, maybe everybody can just pick around that. But we've got our last batch of this recipe in there now by itself, and I'm gonna let them go. The recipe calls for 15 minutes, so I will probably let them go just a little before 15 and see if we can't get these ones to come out less burnt on the bottom. But you can see they are deliciously soft on the inside. And as we take out these potato rolls, you can see just how nice they turned out. Nice and puffy, lightly browned on the top. And these, again, were just delicious, and you guys should most definitely give the recipe a try. And we are going to take a little bit of butter on a butter knife, and we are going to butter the tops of these so that they stay nice and soft on the top and they don't dry out or get too hard. And with the completion of getting these buttered on the top so that they stay nice and soft, that is the completion of all of our Easter side dishes. I want to thank you guys for being so patient and coming along with us as we put all of these recipes together. I really had a fun time doing this with you guys, and we look forward to seeing you back in the kitchen really soon. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.